verse. Now we get to chapter 12. Boy, chapter 12 is really interesting. Chapter 12 reveals to us that there is a galaxy-wide, it's actually universe-wide, but I didn't have a picture of the whole universe, cosmic being, demonic warfare raging today. Now, chapter 9, it just tells us about some of the combatants, but what's here? Well, look at chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Now, a great sign appeared in heaven. Now, what you'll see here is interesting. There are 7 signs that, and this is the launching of these signs, okay? Semeion is the Greek word. And it was a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and her head had a garland of 12 stars, kind of like a little diadem there. And she was expecting, and she was with child, and she cried out in labor, and in pain she gave birth. Another sign, here's the second of the 7, appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head. Whoa, now we get to a very important verse, verse 4. His tail drew 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to earth. That's where we see in the rebellion, in the fight, in Satan's plan, God allows him to take 1/3 of the stars of heaven, they're called, the heavenly host. What are they? Well, actually, Jesus said in chapter 1, the 7 stars which you see in my hand are the 7 messengers, the 7 angeloi. And so it's very interesting that Revelation has already tied the concept of stars as a representation of messengers of God. He holds them and sends them. And so these stars in this sign, now remember, this is all, what would we say, figurative. I mean, there isn't really a woman. The woman we're going to see is Israel, but it's appearing as a woman. So what we're seeing is what most people say are the hard parts of Revelation. There are these images, these representations, these illustrations God uses. So he takes 1/3 of the stars, verse 4, 1/3 of the angels, threw them to earth. So that's Satan's rebellion. And the dragon, who's the dragon? It's Satan, stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. What is this? Is this a dragon eating a child? What is this? It's Satan trying to destroy Christ, the child of the woman. The woman is Israel. Israel's the one that God chose to bear the Messiah. So it's just a fascinating description of what we don't think about. We think about, our economy and am I going to have enough money and get a job and pay back my student loans, and will I ever get married, and where will we live? Interest rates are too high, and what about, all the diseases that are around? We think down here. This is the stratospheric view, the cosmic view. She bore a male child, verse 5, who will rule all nations with a rod of iron. Do you remember there are 800 allusions in the book of Revelation to other verses in the Bible? What's that an allusion to? Psalm 2. It says that Jesus is going to rule the nations with a rod of iron. And that's a Psalm 2 reference. So this is just one of the 800. And the child was caught up to God in his throne. When did that happen? That's the ascension of Christ from the Mount of Olives, when Jesus ascends after his death, burial, and resurrection, and stays around 40 days, teaching his disciples. And then 10 days before Pentecost, this event happens. And then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared by God that he should feed her there for 1,260 days. What is that? It's a future event where God rescues Israel. So, 7 signs. In verse 3, this horrible dragon is Satan. You say, well, how do you know that it's Satan? Well, look over into verse 9. So the great dragon was cast out. Who is the great dragon? Verse 9, one of the most important verses connecting everything. The serpent of old, that's Genesis 3, the one that tempted Eve, called the devil, that's Matthew 4, the one that takes Jesus out in the wilderness and tempts him, and Satan, which is a Hebrew word. Satan means adversary. We know Satan, he's the bad guy, who deceives the whole world, was cast to earth, and his angels were cast out with him. That's how we know that dragon with his tail taking a third of the stars. Some of you were thinking, I don't see angels in there. That's because you have to read the rest. Verse 9 identifies the dragon as Satan and the stars he gets as his angels. So here's what, in Sunday school books, they used to illustrate everything in Sunday school books, so I clipped this out. How would you like a Sunday school lesson in your church where you're doing chapter 12, and here's the dragon with all the stars. See a third of the stars here, and he's got, all these heads and everything. And here's the woman. She has stars, and she is expecting, and she has her feet on the moon, and the sun is behind her. And you'd go, boy, is that really different. You know what I mean? What is it talking about? Well, it's talking about this. From the beginning, remember, Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28 tell us Satan has wanted to destroy, disrupt, resist, and do everything he can in opposition to God's plan. That's what's going on constantly around us. Nobody is smarter or more powerful among God's creations than Satan. So he is constantly coaching his third of the angels to do everything he can to disrupt. And what is God's plan right now? That you all be his invasion force to go out into the world and to be little representations of Christ, Christians, as Acts 11 calls us, and to reflect Christ and to talk about him and to act like him and have people think that we are just little Christ. Now, what has Satan done along the way? He tried to corrupt Adam's line by sending in those angels that are now incarcerated and caused God to kill everybody on earth except for 8 people. That was all Satan's doing. He tried to corrupt Abraham's seed by sending him down to Egypt and having him marry Hagar instead of having the woman that God gave him through whom the seed of promise should come, Sarah. He got him off on Hagar. Then the famine, which tried to drive Israel out of the promised land into Egypt, and then when they were there, Pharaoh tried to kill all the males. That's to destroy. That was Satan using Pharaoh to try and kill all the male Jewish progeny so that there would be no Messiah to come. And then Pharaoh tries to kill all of them, running them out into the sea. And then, if you remember, there came this moment when there was only one descendant of David left, and Athaliah tried to kill him. Then in the New Testament, Satan tried to make Joseph afraid so he wouldn't marry Mary. And then Herod, after Jesus was born, tried to kill all the babies. Then Jesus goes to his hometown in Luke 4, and the people tried to throw him off the cliff. And then twice Jesus was sleeping in the boat, and Satan tried to sink the boat, as if you could kill the master of ocean, earth, and sky by sinking their boat. And then on the cross, finally Satan thought he won, but as we know, he didn't, and Revelation 12 says that. So the conflict of the ages is Satan opposing God's plan for Israel. What is God's plan for Israel? That they would be the covenant chosen people through whom the scriptures would come, through whom the Messiah would come, and through whom the Messiah would return as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords to rescue them at the end of days. The second coming of Christ is completely about rescuing Israel in the Bible. It's Jesus coming to rescue Israel from the Antichrist. And so chapter 12 ends with God's display. Look what it says in chapter 12, verse 13. When the dragon saw he had been cast to earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle. She could fly into the wilderness. So God protects Israel during the second half of the tribulation, where she's nourished for a time, times, and half a time. There's another. Remember, 1,260 days, 42 months, 3.5 years. Time, times, 1 time, 2 times, and a half a time, so 3.5 years. But look at this. Verse 17, and the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of Christ, who have the testimony of Jesus Christ. And verse 11 tells us that they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, the word of his testimony, and they did not love their lives unto death. That's horrible persecution and God preserving people as Satan makes war on the saints.